By the time news was breaking that there was contention in the vote tallying, Raila Odinga says he was already meeting his team, Pentagon, on the way forward.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 contested elections.
Her party won, but then the military rulers of this country, they annulled the results.
This is no longer an election, this is like Alice in Wonderland.
14 Latin American countries do not recognize the result.
For this list, we're looking at the most infamous and consequential cases where election results were challenged by one or more candidates. Which election would you vote for our top spot? Let us know in the comments. Number 10. The 2000 United States Presidential Election.
It's going to be a much happier Thanksgiving for the Bush family. George Walker Bush, the 43rd President of the United States.
At around 2:30 a.m. on November 8, 2000, the networks declared Republican candidate George W. Bush as the next president. About 2 hours later, though, Democratic candidate Al Gore caught up to Bush by just under 2,000 votes in Florida.
This is no longer an election, this is like Alice in Wonderland.
The margin was so close that a recount was legally required, although a 5-4 Supreme Court ruling stopped it. After almost a month of confusion, Bush was deemed the winner. But Gore might have won if the ballots had been tallied differently.
Good morning. Finally, a president-elect. George W. Bush will become the 43rd president of the United States.
The debacle led to the discontinuation of punched card ballots, but also greatly decreased Americans' confidence in the electoral process. It also ramped up Republican accusations of voter fraud versus Democrat accusations of voter suppression, a debate that's taken center stage today.
In the end, Bush became president and served 2 terms. Gore continued his political life as an advocate for action against climate change. Meanwhile, Americans continued to debate the efficacy of the U.S. electoral system and voting procedures across each state.
Number 9. The 2008 Zimbabwean general election. With unemployment up to 94% in 2008, Zimbabwe was struggling under the leadership of Robert Mugabe, who had been president of the African country for almost 3 decades. Mugabe faced his greatest political rival yet in Morgan Tsvangirai, giving some Zimbabweans hope that they'd finally have a new president.
Mugabe is now not only a president of the country, he is the institution that has run our country for the last 30 years. And look at the results. Unprecedented levels of decay and misery and repression.
The results were controversially not released for more than a month, although Tsvangirai emerged ahead of Mugabe. It was only by a small margin, however, leading to a runoff and eventually violence. Fearing for his supporters, Tsvangirai withdrew and Mugabe remained in power. It wouldn't be until 2017 that Mugabe's own party staged a coup, ousting him from office.
In the televised address, an army spokesman denied that a coup was underway, saying it was targeting what it called criminals around the world's oldest leader. The spokesman blamed Mugabe's aides for causing, quote, social and economic suffering.
Then Vice President Emerson Mnangagwa would take Mugabe's place, becoming Zimbabwe's 3rd president. Number 8. The 2014 Turkish local elections. While these were municipal elections, they loomed large as a referendum on Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan's decade-long tenure.
They call it here the polls of polls, especially with all the polarization and the allegations of corruption that came into effect for the last several weeks or several months.
His time in office had been marked by corruption and democratic erosion, sparking anti-government protests in 2013.
The biggest civil uprising in the history of the Turkish Republic kicked off in Istanbul at 5 a.m. on Friday, May 31st.
Adding to the stakes, Erdogan had hinted that he'd run for president soon after. In terms of irregularities, this election had it all: intimidation, bribery, accidental power cuts, and reportedly straight-up ballot burning. Unsurprisingly, Erdogan's party emerged ahead. Amid accusations of fraud, multiple candidates refused to recognize the results, resulting in protests, recounts, and even repeat elections.
The opposition's CHP trailed with 26 to 28% in an election campaign which has seen the government tighten its grip on the courts, purge thousands of police, and block access to Twitter and YouTube as it tried to stem a flow of graft allegations.
Within months, Erdogan would go on to storm the presidential elections and extend his grip on power. Number 7. The 2006 Mexican general election. In Mexico, 2006 was defined by a controversial general election and the political crisis that followed. In an especially close race, National Action Party candidate Felipe Calderón beat opponent Andrés Manuel López Obrador by a 0.58 margin. Although López Obrador and the Party of the Democratic Revolution contested these results, the Federal Electoral Tribunal refused to do a total recount. Calderón was declared the victor, but López Obrador's party wasn't about to take the sitting down. What ensued was a whole year of political unrest, complete with protests that modeled after street fairs. Seriously, booths were set up where you could watch soccer, play chess, and listen to music. Number 6. The 2020 Belarusian Presidential Election. When candidate Sergei Tikhanovsky was arrested just months before this heated election, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya decided to step up in her husband's place.
Я готова принять на себя ответственность и выступить в этот период в качестве национального лидера.
Tikhanovskaya squared off against incumbent President Alexander Lukashenko, described in the press as, quote, Europe's last dictator.
I don't consider that person my main rival. It's he who made the poor little thing my main rival. But she says quite honestly that she has no idea what she's doing.
Lukashenko, who's been president since 1994, claimed a sixth term with an 80% vote, although Tikhanovskaya and her followers challenged this landslide. They weren't alone, with the EU, UK, Canada, and other countries also refusing to accept the results.
Even the Pope is paying attention to what's happening.
Mio pensiero va anche alla cara Bielorussia.
Calling for rights to be respected.
Sanctions have been placed on Belarusian officials, with European Council President Charles Michel accusing them of, quote, violence, repression, and election fraud. As of writing, protests are ongoing. Tikhanovskaya was exiled to Lithuania, and the outcome remains up in the air.
Lukashenko, lock him up, they're saying here. Europe's longest-serving leader may have passed the point of no return.
Number 5. The 2009 Iranian Presidential Election. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad faced 3 other candidates in his pursuit of a second term. Mir Hossein Mousavi was largely seen as his most formidable rival, which made it all the more jarring when he only received 33.86% of the votes.
First, the challenger, Mir Hossein Mousavi, claimed in spite of dirty tricks at the poll, evidence showed that he was the winner. An hour later, sources in President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's camp claimed that he'd won.
While Ahmadinejad apparently pulled off a landslide of 62.63%, many suspected the incumbent president of rigging the election.
All wrong, and the people knows that, but we cannot do anything.
All people knows that, but they can't do anything.
They can't change this.
They can't change this because of the fear of the society.
Millions of Mousavi supporters took to the streets, the country's biggest and most chaotic protests since the Iranian Revolution. It was dubbed the Iranian Green Movement or Persian Spring.
Some carried banners saying, "Where is my vote?" Others accused the government of stealing the election.
Public figures who voiced their support were arrested, including Mousavi, who remains under house arrest. To this day, supporters of the protest movement continue to agitate for reforms. Number 4. The 2007 Kenyan general election. Early on, it appeared Orange Democratic Movement leader Raila Odinga was out in front of this election. Yet it wasn't long until incumbent Mwai Kibaki caught up with 46.4% of the vote, surpassing Odinga by a narrow margin.
This means Honorable Mwai Kibaki is the winner.
However, it was widely argued that the results were tampered with. While Kibaki was sworn in for a second term, civil unrest erupted across the country.
Armed groups on a revenge mission attacked this house belonging to Aluo, opposition leader Raila Odinga's community.
Hundreds died, up to 600,000 were displaced, and havoc continued to spread for just over 2 months. The Kenyan crisis finally came to an end when Odinga and Kibaki reached an unconventional compromise to share power.
The situation was finally resolved early in 2008 through a government of national unity.
Through the National Accord and Reconciliation Act, Kibaki remained president, while Odinga became the country's first prime minister in more than 40 years. Number 3. The 2018 Venezuelan Presidential Election.
14 Latin American countries do not recognize the result.
5 years after a close and contested victory against Enrique Capriles Radonsky, Nicolás Maduro found himself at the center of another intense election. Unlike last time, the results were not close. with Maduro claiming 67.8% of the vote against opponents Henry Falcón and Javier Bertucci. However, Falcón and Bertucci cried foul, citing numerous irregularities. The National Assembly declared Maduro a usurper on the day of his inauguration and named Speaker Juan Guaido the acting president. This did not go over well with Maduro's followers.
Guaido and his supporters could clearly not get in. The man who calls himself interim president even tried to climb the railings. Members of the National Guard stopped them entering the building.
With the Venezuelan presidential crisis in full swing, Guaido was briefly arrested. The dispute over Maduro's presidency persists to this day.
For the first time, I'm not voting because I don't believe in these elections.
Number 2, the 2004 Ukrainian presidential election. The race between incumbent Viktor Yanukovych and Viktor Yushchenko was bitter to say the least. Not only did Yushchenko survive an assassination attempt, he was disfigured by dioxin poisoning.
Я зустрічався з керівником спецслужби України і його першим заступником. Як слідство говорить, отрута була додана до рису, який подавався тоді на стіл.
Although he did recover, the campaign was just starting to get ugly, with accusations of ballot stuffing, falsification, and intimidation. The election results were so close that a runoff was held. With Russia's support, Yanukovych was deemed the winner, which Yushchenko challenged. For weeks, thousands of protesters assembled in Kiev's Independence Square, sparking the Orange Revolution.
But following nationwide protests in what became known as the Orange Revolution, the result was annulled, and Yanukovych was defeated in the revote.
The Ukrainian Supreme Court thus held a second runoff, with Yushchenko prevailing this time. Yanukovych would be elected president in 2010, but would exit office early due to the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution.
Members of the parliament who decisively abandoned Yanukovych after this week's bloodshed stood, applauded and sang the national anthem after it was declared the president was constitutionally unable to carry out his duties.
Before we tally the votes for our top pick, here are some honorable mentions. The 2019 Bolivian general election. Evo Morales declared the winner, leading to protests and his resignation.
He decidido, escuchando a mis compañeros de Conalcam, de la Central Obrera Boliviana, también escuchando a la Iglesia Católica, renunciar a mi cargo de presidencia.
The 2006 Italian general election. Yet another scandal for Silvio Berlusconi. The 2016 United States presidential election. There are sore losers and then there are sore winners.
Trump still has not retracted his false claim that massive voter fraud in 2016 deprived him of the popular vote win. His own lawyers, however, argued the opposite in a court while opposing a Michigan ballot recount just weeks earlier. They wrote, "All available evidence suggests that the 2016 election was not tainted by fraud or mistake."
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1. The 1876 United States presidential election. The U.S. has seen its fair share of contested elections, although this was a particularly bizarre case. Why? Because both Republican Rutherford B. Hayes and Democrat Samuel J. Tilden declared victory. While Tilden was ahead with 184 electoral votes, disputes arose in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina.
Both parties claim to have carried those states. It's not clear who is elected.
Rejecting the results, Republicans accused Democrats of intimidating black voters. The Democrats agreed to accept Hayes as president if the Republicans pulled federal troops from the southern states. With the South back under Democratic control, the Reconstruction era was brought to an end, and years of racial discrimination and disenfranchisement followed.
It doesn't even make sense now, from this distance, 140 years later, that the dude who lost the popular vote and who lost the Electoral College vote, with these weird votes outstanding, that they would give the presidency to him anyway? What?
Although this is generally known as the Compromise of 1877, some historians feel the Great Betrayal is a more appropriate name. Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.